right, good to see you. So I'm sure when I say this name, it will be familiar to you. We lost in a natural way this week Israeli actor Chaim Topol at age 87. And we, of course, know him for his role, his magnificent role as Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof. Also, maybe some of you, and if you haven't seen it, you must see also Salach Shabati, a wonderful, magnificent film. But what many of us don't know, and I have to tell you, I did not know this, but it's been discussed over the last week, is that he was apparently a Torah scholar. He studied for the last 45 years. Wherever he was, he made sure he had a chevruta, and he apparently went through the Talmud twice, and it meant a great deal to him, whether he was in London, whether he was in Israel, whether he was in New York. Whenever his set time was to study, he studied. And equally important, he founded a year-round camp in the Lower Galilee for seriously disabled and ill children. And his children are hoping that people will continue to fund. He was responsible for raising millions for the camp, and he loved getting these children to sing, to dance, and smile in the same way that he did. And Yehi Zichro Baruch. Many of you know our classmate, Linda Siegel, and she was just here for about 5 weeks. And she's proud of it. She's in her 80s, so I'm not revealing something. And I met her a few days ago at the Israel Museum. And standing outside, she bumped into a friend who said to her, "You're back? Don't you realize that you're getting too old for all this traveling?" And I said, that's what keeps her going, everything that she does. And in fact, I immediately thought of Sefer Shmot, the book of Exodus, which we've been looking at a great deal as we think about Pesach. And there's a pasuk there that says, Moshe was 80 and Aaron was 83 when they spoke to Pharaoh. A contemporary commentator who I've mentioned before, Sivan Rachav Meir, suggests telling us Aaron and Moses' age is not just a technicality. It represents a way of thinking. 80 is a great age to begin talking to somebody like a Pharaoh. The world, she says, belongs to those with experience, unlike younger people who think they know it all. Or maybe the way we should be looking at it is the pasuk, the verses telling us that the world belongs to the elderly who are young at heart. So those of us who want to believe that message, please do. And may we enjoy aging. So last week, you indulged my request to play a word association game. One thing that was not mentioned when talking of the word freedom was the word frightening, scary. Maybe you find that strange that I'm suggesting that when we hear the word freedom, frightening might be something that we would think of. Rabbi Samuel Moliver, who lived 1824 to 1898, was a pioneer of the religious Zionist movement, was determined to promote Jewish settlement in Israel during the Ottoman Turkish period in Israel. And he was puzzled by the following pasuk. Give me a second so I can share my screen. Okay. So the Lord spoke to Moshe, saying, "Come speak to Paro, the king of Egypt, and he will let the children of Israel out of his land." But Moshe spoke before the Lord, saying, "Behold, the children of Israel did not hearken to me. How then will Pharaoh hearken to me, seeing that I am of closed lips?" Well, Moliver wonders, why did Moshe argue with God? Why did he not try to find out what Pharaoh's reaction would be? And so Moliver says, actually, I think these verses should be interpreted to mean that Moses said, what will happen if Pharaoh listens to me and agrees to let the children of Israel go, but the children of Israel refuse to hear me? Better I should seal my lips and remain speechless. An interesting twist. One might think any and everyone would jump at the chance of leaving, at the chance of freedom, and at the opportunity to build independently. But Moliver knew human nature. And when interpreting these psukim, he had in mind actually Theodor Herzl. According to Moliver, after Herzl had won permission to purchase land from the Turks, a large piece of land, he tried to appeal to Jewish philanthropists and the broader Jewish community for funds in order to purchase the tract of land. Herzl's enthusiasm was not shared. So while the Turks were willing to sell, the Jewish community was not ready to make the purchase. Interesting. Does it surprise us? Does it? Anybody? Well, you can ponder that. Now, I think it's worth exploring a bit more the Israelites not listening, because we've heard this. Moshe's fear of the Israelites not listening to him. And it's not just because he perhaps had a problem with speech, but there is a concern and for a variety of reasons, as we see. Please mute yourself. So let's look at the next text as we explore reasons why, when we'd expect it, sometimes somebody who is locked up doesn't jump at the prospect of a different way of living, what we assume is a better way of living. Moses spoke thus to the children of Israel, but they did not hearken to Moses because of their shortness of breath and because of their hard labor. Now, in the Hebrew, it says, mikotzer ruach ume'avoda kasha. So, katzar means short, and ruach can mean spirit. And if you put the two together, it can mean I don't have a lot of spirit, but it can also mean short of breath and from hard work. But even when we say short spirit, what does that exactly mean? Is it literal? Is it a metaphor? So educator Melissa Carpenter suggests the following. Aviva Gottlieb Zornberg, the author and the biblical scholar, in her book on Shmot, The Particulars of Rapture, says, to hear is to open oneself up to vulnerability, change, contingency. Let me just add in here. Maybe it isn't so strange if somebody promises you that there is going to be a positive event and you're disappointed once, twice. You're not going to be so open because it takes too much out of you, so that maybe you do stop listening. Pharaoh, the hard-hearted, cannot consider even the idea of change. So we've got change on two levels, the master and the slaves. So he refuses to hear out Moses. Pharaoh afflicts his Israelite slaves with the same deafness by making their lives so hard that they cannot stop and listen to any revolutionary ideas. Thus, Egypt, which in Hebrew is called Mitzrayim, which is a play on words, Meitzarim, which means narrow places, is the place of constriction for both master and slave. Neither one is free. It is the place where people are stunted, cut short, kotzer, from the freedom of thought that make us human. So, Carpenter and Zornberg are seeing not so much short of breath physically, but they're short on dignity, on human quality of being able to think and have free will. Mori Avi, my teacher, my dad, Zichrono Livracha, adds to this with a vivid, almost visual interpretation based on Rashi. And he says, what is meant by kotzer ruach? Rashi gives the simple pshat interpretation, an asthmatic shortness of breath, magnified when one is under severe physical stress. And as I read this and read it, I picture my grandmother, Aleh Shalom, my mother's mother, who suffered, as long as I knew her, terribly from asthma. It didn't stop her from doing anything, but I picture that that's what he's describing, not in the metaphoric way that Zornberg and Carpenter, but that it was a physical, because she had a physical ailment and the slaves were suffering physically. Deep breathing requires the security of steady, relaxed attention to what one is doing. Under the conditions of hard, unrelieved, thankless, servile work, any pause for even minimal physical relief will be met with the lash of the overseer or the sword of the executioner. An erstwhile slave who doesn't appreciate the gift of freedom is described as plagued by a slave mentality. Rashi's interpretation suggests an even more basic state which would blunt a slave's sensibility to promises of alternatives to his existential physical condition. Leave me alone. I can't be bothered. I can't breathe. A slave's reality is a particular state that should properly be called a slave physicality. To be in such a state is to be chained to the moment-to-moment fight, to retain enough physical wherewithal to be able to continue to breathe for another moment, to haul and to lift again and yet again without respite. Only the physically ill can fully comprehend the existential reality of the slave's shortness of breath, according to Rashi. Both interpretations speak to the reality of the slave. Now, this slave that's being described here is not merely of ancient times. As I read these, I think of somebody who's considered a workaholic and therefore can't stop for 25 hours to celebrate Shabbat. And I'm not even talking halakhically. There are articles to that effect. You know, that you don't have enough faith. You're so addicted to the work that you won't survive if you're not doing that activity. And I'm sure you can think of other examples. Claudette, I see your hand up.
Hello. I just wanted to say thank you for raising these points. And if you ever get the opportunity to read Plato's allegory of the cave, it's all about what you're saying here right now. It's in Plato's Republic, the allegory about the cave, how one cannot, if you keep one in one position, one cannot, and bring them up to light, they don't want to face the light.
Beautiful, yes. I happen to have read that a couple of years ago in another context. Very good, yeah. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Do you have a sense of, because we of course are recalling the Egypt of years gone by, but it is meant to be a paradigm for life today. And we can all find ourselves in situations that reflect the Egyptian existence. And it's essential that we keep that in mind. Yes?
I just keep thinking that for an awful lot of people, any kind of change is extremely difficult. And people hold off on doing any change. You have to have a certain amount of flexibility and I guess faith that you can survive and then you can pursue what you want to pursue.
That's not easy.
No.
Even people in difficult situations. What is the phrase about, the devil that's known is sometimes easier than the not known.
Right.
It takes courage and knowledge. One has to have courage, and I think one has to gain knowledge so that they can move on.
Yeah. I don't know which is the more important. I would say what you feel inside, chances are. I don't know that rational thinking always does it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you, Claudette and Bev. So now the fact is that we did leave. So what began this process of the Exodus, which is symbolized by the 5 cups of wine? The steps toward this redemption, Geula. And also, God says, I heard the moans of the children of Israel, whom the Egyptians are holding in bondage. And I remembered my covenant. What do you glean from this pasuk, this verse? What was necessary for God, it sounds as if that's the case, to remember his covenant?
People had to sort of speak out. They had to call to him and express their disappointment in their slavery. They had to want to have the freedom. And then it wasn't just for them that God did it, but it was because of the covenant he made. He had to remind himself of, the forefathers of Abraham and the promises he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Okay, all right. So there are a few parts there. He had to do it for Avotenu, but he wasn't going to do that, it seems, because he held off until he heard the Hebrews, Bnei Israel, crying out to him. Now, what was scary about the fact that they weren't crying out? Why was that a dangerous situation? It took all that time.
They were just accepting their situation without thinking of the hardships that they're going through.
Now,
They
it's
just
interesting,
accepted
Beth, that you say they weren't thinking of the hardships. Can you express somebody that differently? Is it a matter of thinking of the hardships?
Well, they were just accepting it. They just accepted it. This is life and we can't do anything about it.
Yes.
Bracha, I think there's
Go ahead, Marlene.
another side to that coin.
Go ahead.
Until they actually cried out to God, God really did not know whether they still believed in him as their God. It was only until they approached him that he saw that they still had faith in him.
Okay, now that raises an interesting point of, and if they never cried out, would he have nonetheless taken them out? What do you think?
all it would have taken would have been one voice.
Okay. Okay. All right. Now, thank you. Let's look at these verbs and what, in fact, God says he is going to do. And I suppose you could say that at this point, beyond them finally crying out, they are still pretty passive. So, therefore, say to the children of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will take you out, and pay close attention to the wording here. I will take you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. V'hotzeti etchem mitachat sivlot Mitzrayim. Second, and I will save you from their labor. V'hitzalti etchem me'avodatam. Third, I will redeem you. V'ga'alti etchem, with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. Fourth, v'lakachti etchem li la'am, and I will take you to me as a people. V'hayiti lachem, and I will be a God to you. Getting back to what Marlene just said, and you will know that I am the Lord your God. And that's very significant. It's not enough that I will be your God, but you got to know it, because only then will I bring you out, v'heveti etchem, to the land concerning which I raised my hand to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to you as a heritage. I am the Lord. Now, I want to go back over the verbs. There's an interesting order. It begins with a physical suffering. I'm going to take you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. It's clear that we're the underdogs there. Then I will save you, going back to Pasuk Vav, 6th verse, and I will save you from their labor. No longer need to mention the Egyptians. It's just their labor. And I will redeem you. Now there's no reference to taskmaster or oppressor. And then with the fourth, lakachti etchem li, when I take you to me as a people, and I will be a God to you, and you will know that I am the Lord who has brought you out, and I will bring you to the land, v'heveti. The first three are the means, all leading up to the purpose that you will be for me a people, and that I will bring you to the land to be that people that I promised, avotenu. Those are different stages. Now, those stages are a process. They're not going to immediately take to God in the way that God wants them to. In fact, you remember that as they're leaving Egypt, God takes them on a journey to avoid seeing the Philistines at war, because he's afraid they're going to be afraid. And he realizes, God realizes, that they're not going to immediately trust. The process of going from the oppression and leaving is a process. You know, I'm thinking that there are many who say that somebody who becomes a Baal Tshuva too quickly, there's something a little suspicious about that. It's not healthy. Somebody who grows in a responsible way is healthier. And God recognized that. And in fact, he realizes that it's really only the next generation who will be able to responsibly create a free society. When you've gone through the experience that they went through as slaves, you can't expect them to be able to create the society. And that's in fact why we needed a Moshe, who was not a slave. Now, like Molliver, a Simcha Bunim in the late 18th century also perceives human nature. And he says the following: "Say therefore to the Israelite people, I am God. I will free you from the labors of the Egyptians." The labors of the Egyptians. Sivlot. Sevel also, lisbol, means to suffer. Even though their work was harsh and brutal, the Israelites nevertheless became accustomed to suffering and bore the yoke with patience, savlanut. Interesting, that's what I love about Hebrew, how it builds from the same shoresh. With patience, savlanut, seeing their situation as natural. What Beth said a few minutes ago, that they tolerated it, they accepted it. The Blessed Holy One said, since they no longer fall ill, nor sense the bitterness of their fate, they are in great danger. And the redemption cannot wait any longer. Therefore, speak to the Israelite people that I will take them out from their tolerance of and patience with the labors of the Egyptians. That, what do they call it today? That we need to be upstanders rather than bystanders and not to be silent? When God saw that they were being too accepting, as bad as things were, for whatever reason, that could not continue. And he had to take action. It was obvious that he could not wait on their own. Nothing was going to happen. And so he had to take action. Now,
This reminds me again of the Shoah, unfortunately, where many people kind of said, oh, I was in the war, I fought with the Germans, nothing is going to happen to me. And they didn't read what was going on, in addition to all the lies that the Germans were saying. But, again, there was a certain comfort, a certain tolerance, and a hope that things would get better.
Bracha,
Yeah.
Shirley I'm here.
yes,
The word patience bothers me, and I'm wondering if that's an interpretation. And I'm wondering whether the people basically had just given up and feeling hopeless, and that this was their way of life, and there was nothing they could do, so they just trudged along being slaves. But I don't think it was really patience per se, but rather hopelessness.
well, I think he's using that word because they didn't immediately cry and moan. So it seemed, they weren't reacting. So I don't know that it's that significant, but I think because he's saying that they were in a dangerous situation, that he is actually using the word intentionally, in that they weren't putting up an argument against it, a fight. They were just laid back and being patient. When you think of somebody who's being patient, sometimes we compliment such a person, but not if it's being patient when they should be putting up a fight. Haven't you ever nudged somebody and said, act? I'm sure you have, Shirley Ann.
That's
Right?
true. But in this case, I think they're just hopeless and have given up.
Yeah. No, and that's why God,
Yeah.
you know, I don't know that if he's blaming them for that, but whether he is or whether he isn't, it's time to get them out of there. It's time to get them out of there. So,
Bracha,
go
Bracha,
ahead.
That goes back actually to the first part of the discussion where we talked about the word ruach.
Go on.
And rather than breath or spirit, it
Yeah.
almost said to me they had lost, and I know it's spirit, but I think because the loss of spirit meant for them, they had lost their will to try to affect any kind of change.
I would agree with Marlene. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah,
I'm just gonna
absolutely.
add
So-
one more thing, is that many people didn't leave.
Many didn't.
Exactly. So there were still, you know, those who finally had enough courage to get up the will to go, left behind a great many.
Yeah,
Bracha,
go ahead.
we really don't have to look back 3,000 years. I mean, we can look back 3 or 4 generations to the concentration camps. Those people were worked to death. They didn't have any strength to do anything. And if they did lift up their hand or ask or complain, they would be shot on the spot.
Yeah,
And
well, Bev just alluded to the Shoah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is and also when the soldiers left the camps, there were Jewish people who did not want to leave. They were afraid to leave. They were so used to what they were doing, and they were terrified that they would be shot on the way out or whatever. And what can I say?
Yeah, no, I don't think anyone is judging, not the people of the Shoah, nor the people in Egypt. Far be it for us to do that. Very difficult. But thank God there were those who did take action. Thank God. Yeah. Okay, now, on a very different level, we've established that we need a certain spirit and a certain physical strength to go after freedom. What else did B'nai Israel, the Israelites, the Hebrews, or anyone even today need to be able to be free? Something we haven't discussed at all, not today and not last week. On a very practical level.
Moses gave to them that when he gave them, started to teach them how to be independent by bringing Torah to them. We also need to know that with studying of Torah, which is what Moses brought to the slaves and to the generation, that we can do it ourselves. With that knowledge, we learn to do it.
Okay, so you're still being very spiritual, teaching him Torah. I'm now talking on a very different level. I'll just give you another 30 seconds, people, to think of what else. You did use the word to make them independent. What would they need to be independent?
They need food, and they,
Okay, Tzipora.
There was a lot of literature about what happened to many of the Blacks when they were freed in America. How some of them had trouble adapting to the fact that the masters weren't feeding them any longer. They had to get their own housing, their own work, their own food, and how difficult it was having lived for generations where they were almost like children suddenly being told to be adults. And there's a lot of literature on how they had to slowly adapt to freedom.
Okay. You and Bev just kind of, if you put it together without
Mhm.
having said it exactly,
Independence.
okay, we heard that word.
Yeah.
And with food and housing, I want you to look at this picture. Not too many have depicted this verse in the book of Exodus. This picture
Mhm.
is taken from 14th century, the Golden Haggadah, and it depicts this pasuk. And the Israelites despoiled the Egyptians. What do you see? Tell me everything you see in the picture.
Well, they're stealing. They're
Well, they're
taking.
not stealing. They were given those things.
Okay, but
But it's
If-
the chalice, the cups, and there's wood items to be used for the Mishkan.
okay, but you see them. Wait a minute, which of you said stealing?
I did.
You did. Okay, but that's what Zipporah saw. Bev, you saw it differently, that they were given those. But according to the picture, it looks like they're
There's-
taking, right?
Yes.
And you see somebody else facing the other direction who's got something that looks like it's about to fall off. And if you put the picture together with, and you can see that they're slaves by looking, they don't have shoes on their feet. This picture has caused a lot of controversy.
Mhm.
Okay, and just the fact that it says that this is what they were doing, that they were taking, it seems contrary to what we, even in our class, have discussed, that we've been told that we're not meant, even when we go to war, to take objects. We saw that when we discussed Megillat Esther, and when the army goes
Okay,
to war,
Lord,
that we don't take.
go.
So this seems a bit odd. But go on, go ahead.
Bracha, isn't it, do I not remember that the Egyptians were, because of the plagues, wanted them to leave as fast. They'd had enough of and they were giving them, just go,
Yes.
here, take everything, but go, get out of here.
So why did you say steal to begin
I
with?
don't know why. It was a reaction to the picture, to tell you the truth.
Okay, because it does look like, if you don't know, and you
Yeah.
have it together with that verse that says they're despoiling them, then that's what it looks like, a
Yeah,
heist. Okay, now put that together with these verses that come before it. And God said to Abraham, you shall surely know that your seed will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and they will enslave them and oppress them for 400 years. And also the nation that they will serve will I judge. And afterwards they will go forth, birchush gadol, with great possessions. So it's not a heist, but it's actually the consummation of an oath.
yeah.
Now, to some of us, that still might not justify it. Why is God saying that I'm going to let you take from the Egyptians' property? Anybody want to suggest before we go on how you feel about
Bracha,
that?
in the mentality of a slave, even today, the American Black slave feels that they were not paid for their labor. They need something to make them feel worthwhile. And God knew that they needed the possessions of the Egyptian so that they can get on with their life, and they felt like they were paid for their labor.
Okay, so Some feel that it's absolutely justified. The way they were treated, they were not paid, so it's compensation. Okay, anybody else? Okay, so let's go on. I want you, and this takes us back to what Zipporah brought up. Let's take a look at how this taking came about. Pay close attention. And I will put this people's favor in the eyes of the Egyptians, and it will come to pass that when you go, you will not go empty-handed. Each woman shall borrow from her neighbor and from the dweller in her house silver and gold objects and garments, and you shall put them on your sons and on your daughters, and you shall empty out Egypt. That's the first time that it's discussed. Please speak into the ears of the people and let them borrow, each man from his friend and each woman from her friend, silver vessels and golden vessels. So the Lord gave the people favor in the Egyptians' eyes. Also, the man Moses was highly esteemed in the land of Egypt, in the eyes of Pharaoh's servants and in the eyes of the people. And the children of Israel did according to Moses' order, and they borrowed from the Egyptians and silver objects, golden objects, and garments. The Lord gave the people favor in the eyes of the Egyptians, and they lent them and they emptied Egypt. Now, it sounds as if all of this is going on in a very friendly way. Whether they were giving them the sense that they were borrowing and they were going to come back. Now, what Zipporah said is that there is talk that they were only too happy to have them leave. There's also discussion in the Perushim, the interpretations, that the Egyptians were also very impressed that they had 3 days of darkness, and at that time, Bnei Israel could have stolen, but they did not. But what is significant here is what Erica Brown says. We've mentioned her before, a great educator and Torah scholar. The act of asking that fell upon each individual was a form of assertiveness training, a lesson in asking for one's due. Even if it did not result in any monetary gain, just the objects, making demands for restitution and support had the secondary effect of empowering each person to attend to his or her freedom. The verbs beg us to think of the act of asking as ultimately more important than the result of taking. Now, you still might feel, well, but still, isn't that giving a wrong message? That you're letting, as much as they suffered, that you're letting it be known that you can take from somebody, even if it doesn't belong to you. Well, no. What God was doing was using this experience to model for the new nation, the Israelites and all future nations, how to behave with your servants. What does that mean? Even in that time, it was known that when a slave or a servant left its master, the master was meant to be generous to the person leaving. Maybe they didn't do that in America, but that's what was meant to be. It might sound strange, but yes, that's what was meant to be. And so the Egyptians had to go through that. Whether they understood that message, but it was more a message for Bnei Israel, the Israelites. You have a right to this, but it's not just for you to benefit, but it's to teach you how you have to treat anyone that you're going to be responsible for in the future. And another Bible scholar, Elchanan Summit, adds to this when he says, we have the impression not of a frenzied flight of slaves escaping from their masters, but rather a respectable and just exodus of a nation that is lawfully leaving its slavery behind while punishment is meted out to the slave masters. The exodus of the children of Israel from Egypt necessitated great wealth. As we heard a few minutes ago, they needed to be able to live and to build their nation and the Mishkan. For if one leaves naked and penniless, then his freedom is not complete. Now, there are plenty of rich people that are not really free, but come on, in order to live and have some type of freedom, you do need, that's the world. It appears, therefore, that departure with silver and gold was a crucial element in the circumstances of the Exodus, as described succinctly by the Torah in Parashat Beshalach, and the children of Israel went out with a high hand. I want to reiterate again, though, this notion of leaving with rechush gadol, that it was a lesson. First of all, slavery was to be abolished, but a lesson for when you have employees, know how to treat and make sure that they are compensated. And it's almost as if I'm sounding apologetic that slaves who suffered so shouldn't feel that they have a right to what they took. But we have to go beyond. Now, perhaps more than anything, as we talk about different ideas regarding freedom, more than anything, being free means believing in possibilities of change. And in fact, our Exodus narrative begins with that thought. When Moshe is at the sneh, the burning bush, and God said, do not draw near here. Take your shoes off your feet, because the place upon which you stand is holy soil. Now, this is an interesting play on words. It might be take your shoes off, because it says, shal na'alecha. Na'alayim is your shoes. But me'al raglecha, regel we know is foot. But what else? Look at what I have. Even if you don't read Hebrew, you can see the similarity in the words regel, resh gimel lamed, and the same word except a hey in the front. Hergel means habit, right? So some interpret this as meaning shall unlock your habits. God is saying to Moshe, up until now, you have been a shepherd. You are now going to unlock your habits, and you are going to be the messenger of getting these slaves to change their habits. And that is going to be very, very difficult, as we've discussed for the last hour. But you have to get them to see the possibility of change. And that's what a free person can do. To see it doesn't have to be this way. And be impatient with a situation that isn't what you want. There is a marvelous midrash regarding the Red Sea, the Reed Sea, Yam Suf. But actually, before I close with that, by the way, you know that we're told at the Seder table, all the different food items and the dipping and the reclining is so that children will ask, why do we do this? So that we have the opportunity, based on their questions, to tell the Pesach story. And that is true. But it's also suggested that the children should see that nothing remains the same, that we can change things, because that's a very, very important message of Pesach, that things can change. Okay, getting back to this midrash. We see a midrash that bemoans the hesitancy that is prevalent among many people regarding openness to new possibilities. So, from Shmot Rabbah, apparently the bottom of the sea, though safe to walk on, was not completely dry, but a little muddy, like a beach at low tide. Reuven stepped into it and curled his lip. What is this muck? Shimon scowled. There's mud all over the place. This is just like the slime pits of Egypt, replied Reuven. What's the difference? Complained Shimon. Mud here, mud there, it's all the same. And so it went for the two of them, grumbling all the way across the bottom of the sea. And because they never once looked up, they never understood why on the distant shore everyone else was singing and dancing. For Reuven and Shimon, the miracle never happened. We have to be open to looking up and sideways and every way. Yes. And I'll tell you, if ever there is an example of somebody being willing to look in new ways, 30 days ago, plus 2 days, Dvori Pillai lost her 6-year-old and 8-year-old in one of those terrorist attacks. And 2 days ago, she gave birth to her 10th child, a son. I'm very, very curious what the name of that young boy will be. And if you see her being interviewed, ay, ay, ay. May God give her and her husband, who is in rehab, and Hadassah Har HaTzofim, the strength that she obviously reflects as she's interviewed on TV. and שנזכה, שהיא תזכה לחיים. Yes. Amen. Amen. So I will not see you next week. I think you're doing something that I don't do here, something political Israel, but I will see you on the 29th. Please God. So be well and stay warm. I hope we'll stay warm also. Okay. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yashar Koach.
Thanks,
My
Shar.
pleasure.
Yashar
Thank you
Koach.
so much.
Thank you, Bracha.